A man buys a coffee table, assembles it wrong, and 20 minutes later, his baby is decapitated when he trips carrying him past it. The glass was supposed to be unbreakable. The salesman promised, but here we are. The baby's headless body is now in the crib, the severed head just rolled under a chair, and his wife just walked in asking when dinner's ready. Now, if that concept sounds terrifying to you, it should, because these are movies that are actually deeply, traumatically terrifying. Not just like, boo, jump scare, but you'll watch these movies and be like, what the hell am I watching? And I guarantee at least half of these movies you've never even heard about before. And that's a crime, because I love horror movies. I've seen thousands of them, so I gotta share the good stuff. You can't gatekeep when you're a horror creator. But let's talk about the coffee table. The coffee table was shot in 10 days in a friend's apartment in Spain for basically no money. And somehow it's been called the most emotionally devastating horror movie in years, which is a bold claim when the monster is a piece of furniture from a clearance sale. But here's what happens. Jesus and Maria just had a baby. They're shopping for furniture, and Jesus decides this is the one decision in his entire marriage where he's gonna stand his ground. The table is hideous. Gold naked women legs are holding up the glass top. It's the kind of thing you see in a divorced guy's condo. Don't ask me how I know. But the salesman swears the glass is unbreakable, and Jesus wants to feel like he controls something in his life. He doesn't really have much control otherwise. So he wins the argument, because at the end of the day, it is just a coffee table. They bring it home, he assembles it, but he's missing a screw to lock the glass in place. Maria leaves to get groceries while he's alone with the baby. 20 minutes into the movie, Jesus trips while carrying the baby past the table and the glass shatters. The baby is decapitated. You don't see the fall, you just hear the crash and then silence. And then blood starts hitting the walls. The rest of the film is just 70 minutes of Jesus trying to hide what happened. He puts the headless body in the crib. He can't bring himself to touch the severed head under the chair. And when Maria comes home, he tells her the baby's sleeping. His brother shows up for dinner with his pregnant girlfriend, and they all sit around eating spaghetti while the dead baby is 15 feet away. Every piece of normal conversation becomes a razor. Someone says they would love to see the baby. Someone jokes about how the glass broke. Someone talks about Cayento's future, which is the baby's name. And you're just sitting there knowing the truth that they don't, waiting for the moment it all falls apart. The director Kay Casa said he wanted to create horror based on random cruelty, no supernatural elements required, and he succeeded in the worst possible way. The neighbor's dog eventually sniffs out the head, Maria finds it, walks to the balcony, and jumps. Jesus follows, and the only survivor is the brother, who spends the rest of his life catatonic, only able to repeat the words, "the coffee table," over and over. Stephen King even went on to call it the Coen brothers' darkest dream, which feels accurate when the scariest thing in the movie is just a husband too afraid to tell his wife what he has done. The film works so well because it traps you in this dramatic irony for an hour and refuses to let you leave. And by the end, you feel like you've been holding your breath the entire time, even though nothing jumped out at you once. If you've ever had a panic attack, this movie is panic attack times 10. Now let's move on to The Possession of Deborah Logan. Adam Robitio made this found footage film about Alzheimer's and demonic possession for his first directorial debut, which is either the smartest genre blend anyone's attempted or the most tasteless, depending on how you feel about using a real disease as a metaphor for evil taking over someone's body. Personally, if you've ever had a family member go through dementia, this movie hits really hard, and it is very terrifying. The setup is that a medical student named Mia and her film crew arrive to document Deborah Logan's battle with Alzheimer's, and the early scenes are just heartbreaking in a very non-supernatural way. Deborah forgets her daughter Sarah's name, throws tantrums about lost gardening tools, wanders the house at night confused and angry. These scenes were based on the director's own uncle's experience with the disease, so they're medically accurate and deeply uncomfortable to watch because you're seeing a real person disappear in real time. Then things start getting weird. Deborah's found naked at her own telephone switchboard at 3 a.m, speaking fluent French about serpents and sacrifices, which is not a typical Alzheimer's symptom, no matter how advanced. A rash spreads across her back that looks more like scales than skin irritation, and she starts trying to peel off her own face in front of the cameras. The crew then discovers that switchboard line 337 belonged to Dr. Henry Desjardins, who's a physician who disappeared decades earlier after performing ritualistic murders on 4 young girls as part of an immortality ritual that required 5 victims total. Deborah had killed Desjardins years ago when she found out he was planning to take Sarah as the 5th, and now his spirit is using her deteriorating mind as an entry point to finish what he started. The possession manifests through all of the snake imagery. She bites people, injects venom, spits acid at cops, and moves with this reptilian stillness before striking. And the special effects team deliberately kept the transformation very subtle, so it felt more real than theater movie magic. The climax then happens in a cave where Deborah has kidnapped a 9-year-old cancer patient named Kara to complete the ritual. And when Sarah and Mia find them, you are met with one of the most disturbing scenes you will ever see in a horror movie. Have you ever seen a snake try to eat something? Well, now imagine if a human's jaw could do that. Because Deborah's jaw is completely unhinged and distended, and Kara's entire head is inside her mouth as she attempts to swallow the child whole. It was shot with found footage shakiness and a dim flashlight lighting, which makes it worse because you can barely see what's happening, but you saw it, so you understood enough. The image then went viral afterwards and became one of those screenshots people share with the caption, "What the fuck is this from?" Because it's generally one of the most disturbing things put on a film in the last decade. Jill Larson, who played Deborah, had never even seen a horror movie before taking this role, which is insane when you watch her performance. She shifts between confused elderly woman and malevolent entity easily. And the scenes that disturb most aren't even the supernatural ones. It's watching her forget Sarah's name. It's watching her become violent over small confusions, because those all hit really hard to people who have dealt with this disease before. Now let's talk about our next horror movie that is genuinely terrifying. And if you like horror movies where characters you hate die in the worst way possible, you might like this one. Rob Savage directed Host, the Zoom pandemic horror film that everyone watched in 2020. You've seen it, you probably liked it. This is not about Host. This is about his follow-up film, and it needed to be 77 minutes of pure unfiltered chaos shot entirely on an iPhone with one of the most unbearable main characters in horror history. This is Dashcam. This movie is genuinely good, but it has so many negative reviews just because the main character is that unlikable. Personally, I like that because shitty people getting what they deserve is kind of a cool trope, but just keep in mind, if you read the reviews for this movie, you're going to see a lot of negativity, despite it having a really strong plot. Literally, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a 47% because half the critics thought it was brilliant and the other half wanted to break their television in two, which is exactly what the director was going for. Annie Hardy plays a fictionalized version of herself as a loud, obnoxious, anti-vax, magnet-injecting, MAGA hat-wearing musician who live streams a show called Band Car where she freestyle raps while driving around Los Angeles during COVID lockdowns, and then she flies to London to surprise visit her former bandmate Stretch, and then immediately starts fighting about masks and vaccines, steals his car, and picks up a food delivery gig that leads her to transporting an elderly woman named Angela to a secret location for cash. That's just the first 15 minutes, if I'm being honest with you. Angela is frail and mute and clearly wrong. She starts vomiting yellow liquid, pees in the backseat. I think she shits herself at some point too. And then they discover staples sewn into her mouth. And when those are removed, all hell breaks loose in the most literal sense possible. You should not have unstapled the old person. Angela transforms from helpless little old lady to a supernatural, demonic, powerful thingy-majiggy, throwing people across rooms, killing bystanders, chasing Annie through forests and fairgrounds with inhuman strength and speed. The actual mythology behind the movie is hidden in the running live stream comment thread of this left side of the screen. Angela is actually a missing 16-year-old whose body has been consumed and rapidly aged by a parasitic demon that needs young bodies to inhabit. And there's a cult worshipping this thing that treats human hosts the way a hermit crab treats its shells. The director designed the film as deliberate information overload. You can watch the action or read the comments that actually explain what's happening, but you cannot do both at once, which means that you are constantly missing something no matter where you look. This movie just keeps coming at you. There is no slowing down. The creature design here is genuinely impressive for a $100,000 iPhone movie though. Angela's transformation is mostly practical effects, and when Annie finally kills her, the parasite emerges from her mouth as this grotesque embryonic sort of thing with legs bound together, performed by someone in a suit doing a freaky monkey caterpillar dance. It is disturbing in the way Pan's Labyrinth creatures are disturbing, where you can tell it's a puppet, but that somehow makes it worse because someone had to build this nightmare. The most divisive element of the film is Annie herself, who was designed to be as irritating as humanly possible. She is selfish, screaming slurs, and anti-mask rants even as people are dying around her. And whether this movie is scary or just exhausting depends entirely on your tolerance for being trapped with someone you actively hate. Lots of critics, including myself, call her one of the worst characters ever put on screen, which was the point. Savage wanted to create a horror experience that was genuinely unpleasant on multiple levels. Not just the supernatural stuff, but the social discomfort of watching someone be awful while you're forced to rely on her perspective. If you're gonna watch this movie, watch it with a bunch of friends, have a drink, and just laugh, and then be freaked out by the cool creature design and stuff like that. If you watch this alone, or if you take it extremely seriously, you're likely to get pissed off. Here's like 15 seconds of what you're getting into.
Yes, lockdown, getting it on. Having to f your own dad, come on. Commit the sin of incest. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. Hive-minded as the day is long, and your girlfriend f***s you with a 9-inch dong.
Let's move on to another found footage movie, the Atticus Institute. The US government confirmed demonic possession is real in the 1970s and immediately tried it to turn into a weapon against the Soviet Union, which, why not? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? Chris Sparling wrote this movie and directed this as a fake documentary that looks so convincing people kept asking if the Atticus Institute actually existed. And the answer is no, but the Stargate Project did, which was a real government program investigating psychic powers for military use. So we're not that far off from this being plausible. The film is structured through talking head interviews with survivors who look genuinely traumatized, with lots of grainy 1970s archival footage, which has the exact texture of declassified government films. And the whole thing plays straight until you realize you've been watching a horror movie disguised as a History Channel doc about scientific failures. Dr. Henry West founded the Atticus Institute in rural Pennsylvania to test people claiming psychic abilities, and for years he just exposed frauds and con artists until Judith Winstead showed up. She passed every single test they threw at her: telekinesis, pyrokinesis, remote viewing, and then kept going past what should be possible. Objects moved without her touching them. Candles ignited from across the room, and staff members started experiencing bizarre events in their personal lives that Judith seemed to be causing from inside the testing facility. One researcher's house caught fire the same night he expressed doubt about her abilities, which is either incredible coincidence, it's not, or proof that Judith can commit arson with her mind, just like how I thought I could do when I was 12. Yes, one time I tried to mentally explode somebody's bike because I didn't like them. It didn't work. I can't explode things with my mind. Anyways, the team eventually realizes Judith isn't psychic. She is actually possessed, which gets confirmed when a spectral photography experiment captures this cloud-like entity leaving her body during a seizure. That's when the military takes over under national security pretenses, and things go from a scientific study to a nightmare pretty fast. Just like anything when the government gets involved. Because they're not interested in helping Judith or understanding the phenomena. They want to weaponize the demon inside her for Cold War purposes, which is the most American thing I've ever heard in my life. The scariest part isn't the possession itself, but watching the scientists realize that they've lost control and then watching the military deliberately make it worse. Raya Kilstead plays Judith with these large almond-shaped eyes that just stare through you. And most of the disturbing moments don't use special effects at all. It's just her sitting there, motionless, while something else looks out through her face. There's a scene where she's supposed to find the thought hammer during a telepathy test, but instead pulls out something deeply personal and devastating about the examiner. And later, they discover the demon was controlling the interrogator the whole time, commanding him to ask each question while he thought he was in charge. The possession was not just random chaos, it was strategic and patient, which makes every interaction feel like you're 3 steps behind something that's already won. Now let's move on to a horror movie that you definitely probably haven't heard of. The Empty Man. You spend 2 hours watching a detective search for a missing girl, and then the film reveals in the last 15 minutes that he doesn't exist. He never did, and his entire identity was manufactured 3 days ago by a cult trying to create an empty vessel for a cosmic entity. Disney actually released this movie with zero marketing during COVID. It made $4.8 million, got a cinema score of D+, and now has a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes because everyone who actually watched it realized they'd seen something genuinely disturbing that nobody knew how to sell to audiences, which is kind of the problem with cosmic horror, because good cosmic horror is so hard to explain in itself. That's kind of the point, right? And I've had a lot of movies get cosmic horror very, very wrong. This is the rare example where they get it right. David Pryor directed this as his first narrative feature after years of making documentaries for David Fincher, and you can feel that influence in every frame. The camera work is cold and clinical. The sound design uses silence as a weapon, and the pacing trusts you to be patient while it builds something cosmic and terrible. The film opens with a 22-minute prologue set in 1995 Bhutan, where 4 hikers discover a massive skeletal figure embedded in a cave. One of them touches it and enters a catatonic state, and over 3 days the entity communicates through him until the others commit ending your own life aside and killing other people, and only one survivor remains. Then the title card appears and you're in 2018 Missouri following ex-cop James LaSombra investigating a missing teen connected to the Empty Man urban legend. If you blow over an empty bottle on a bridge, day 1 you will hear him, day 2 you will see him, and day 3 he will find you. James follows the trail into the Pontifex Society, which is a cult that practices ritualistic meditation and studies the concept of the tulpa, a Tibetan Buddhist idea that concentrated collective thought can manifest physical reality. The high school in the film is named after Jacques Derrida, the philosopher of deconstruction, which should have been the first sign this wasn't going to be a standard ghost story. The investigation spirals through increasingly surreal territory. Nighttime fire rituals in the woods, mass people taking their own lives, strange frequencies, ghosts that may or not be hallucinations, up until James discovers he himself is a tulpa, thought into existence by the cult's collective belief using newspaper clippings and manufactured memories. His grief over his dead wife and son, his entire personality, the memories that make him feel like a person, all of this was created to make him emotionally vulnerable enough to serve as a host for the Empty Man entity. He doesn't actually exist. He was created less than a week ago. The horror here is deeply existential in a way that most films can't even attempt. What if your consciousness is just a construct designed to be the vessel for something else? What if the personality that you cling to was always temporary for a larger purpose that you will never understand? What if you, that person with some hyperfixation, all of that is a lie, and you are just a vessel for a demonic entity that will control you in a week? That's a crazy fucking thought. You know what else is a crazy fucking thought? Triangles. The shape is terrifying. Well, kind of. This movie is actually called Triangle, but it's not about triangles. It's about the Bermuda Triangle, which, fun fact, I've been to, and I'm alive, so it kind of debunks a lot of things about the Bermuda Triangle, but I've been to the Bermuda Triangle before. I was in there for a little bit and I came right out. Not gonna lie, I was on a cruise ship when this happened when I was like 12. 14, 15, 16. I was 16. I was on a cruise ship when I was 16 and I was like, we're going to the Bermuda Triangle? That's terrifying. Well, it wasn't actually that bad, but the night we went in there was fog everywhere. That is real. That part's real. There was fog everywhere. And fog on the ocean when you're on a cruise liner that's like sailing is one of the most creepiest thoughts ever. The ambience is it's pretty. Anyways, Christopher Smith made a time loop horror film where the punishment is eternal and the only thing that you're guilty of is being a bad parent, which means every cycle through the loop just confirms that you deserve to be there. The worst part is you almost start to agree with the universe by the end. What do I mean? Well, Jess is a single mother with an autistic son named Tommy. She goes on a sailing trip with friends. A storm capsizes the boat, and they're rescued by a passing ocean liner called the Aeolus, named after the Greek god who gives Odysseus a bag of winds that blows his ship back to where it started. Isn't that the thing from SpongeBob? Like literally, doesn't David Hasselhoff give SpongeBob the bag of winds? No, it's Neptune's dot. That's gotta be what that's based off of, right? It doesn't actually say that the film's in the Bermuda Triangle, but it's heavily implied. Anyways, the film is telling you exactly what's about to happen if you know your mythology. The ship is empty. Someone in a burlap mask starts killing them one by one. Jess fights the killer to the deck and pushes her overboard, looks down at the water and sees herself and her friends approaching the ship on the capsized yacht, about to board for the first time. She is trapped in a time loop and the masked killer is another version of herself. Multiple versions of Jess exist on the ship at the same time at different points in the time loop, which means you're not just watching one person repeat the same events. You're watching several different iterations of the same person trying different strategies to break the cycle and failing every time. She finds notes written in her own handwriting saying if they board, kill them all. She discovers a pile of identical lockets that all belong to her, and worst of all, she finds a massive pile of Sally's corpses hidden on the ship. Proof this has happened hundreds of times before and will happen hundreds of times again. Poor Sally though, she's just so unlikable she got murdered that much. The film took Smith 2 years to write, and the structure really shows. Every detail pays off. If you notice something, you'll be like, damn, that's cool, I noticed it because it pays off later. Every piece of dialogue has meaning you only catch on a second viewing. And the whole thing is built on the myth of Sisyphus, which one of the characters directly references during the voyage, so you know exactly what kind of story you're in. Eventually, Jess falls overboard, washes up on a beach, makes her way home, and discovers another version of herself there abusing her son. She kills her body, wraps the body in a canvas, and drives away with Tommy, and a seagull strikes the windshield. She stops to throw it away and sees a massive pile of identical dead seagulls, which is visual confirmation that this cycle extends far beyond the ship. There's a car accident, Tommy dies, and a taxi driver who's clearly Sharon the ferryman takes Jess back to the harbor where she boards the yacht again and the cycle restarts forever. Most time loop movies are utter dog shit. This is one of the rare ones where it's really, really good. Now let's move on to a little bit of a saucy horror. X. This is about exactly what you think it is. If you've seen this movie, you know. If you haven't seen this movie, you're about to find out. Ty West shot this slasher in New Zealand for about $1 million during COVID, and it's set in 1979 Texas, which means the entire aesthetic is split screens, zoom lenses, and grainy 16mm film, and ripped straight from the era where horror directors thought excessive zooms on people's faces was peak cinema. Okay, so before we talk about this movie, there is a word I'm not allowed to say on YouTube, so I'm gonna refer to it as corn, and say things like corn on the cob, or growing corn on the cob, or things like that. If you replace the C with a certain other letter, you'll get what I mean. But if I don't do this, then the video will get demonetized. So anyways, 6 people drive to a remote farm to secretly shoot some corn on the cob called the Farmer's Daughters, who all like corn. There's Maxine, the aspiring corn film star played by Mia Goth, her producer boyfriend Wayne, a burlesque dancer, Bobby Lynn, an ex-Marine Jackson, and the creepy director RJ, who keeps talking about elevated corn production, and his girlfriend Lorraine, who's there just to hold the boom mic and have an existential crisis about participating in the corn industry of creating corns on the cob with extra butter. They rent a guest house from Howard and Pearl, an elderly couple who are not informed that their property would be hosting a film shoot involving multiple people having aggressive corn on the cob creation in a barn. And Howard is the kind of old man who answers the door about corn with a shotgun. No corn on the cob is allowed in this house. Bang! Pearl watches the filming through windows and becomes obsessed with Maxine, who looks exactly how Pearl looked 50 years ago when she still had youth and beauty and the option to do anything with her body besides watch it decay. Mia Goth plays both roles under extensive prosthetics built by Weta Workshop, which is the same effects house that did Lord of the Rings, which feels like overkill until you see how unsettling the transformation is between young Maxine and ancient Pearl. The film keeps cutting between the young crew making corn and Pearl's aged body in the same frame. And the juxtaposition is deliberately uncomfortable because West wants you to feel the same jealous rage Pearl feels while watching these people do things that she can no longer do. Well, honestly, in 2025, she could probably have a giant career these days, if I'm being honest with you. I think that's like a thing. Look, honestly, in 2025, Pearl, go get it, girl. You go do your thing these days. Like, people really like their corn. When Howard then refuses Pearl's cornual advances due to his heart condition, she snaps and starts killing everyone, valid crash out. RJ gets stabbed and decapitated after rejecting her. Valid crash out. Wayne steps on a nail and gets pitchforked through both eyes. Valid crash out. Bobby Lynn gets pushed into a lake and eaten by an alligator that's been lurking there the whole film. Valid crash out. And the most disturbing scene doesn't involve violence at all, because Pearl climbs naked into bed with a sleeping Maxine and just starts corning her. Yeah, corning her. It is a different type of violence, we'll put it that way. If you think that we were done talking about corn, you're wrong, because we're going to talk about Pearl now, which you might be thinking, Chupacabra, isn't that the name of the old lady from this movie? Yes, astounding, astute viewer that notices things. It is, and this is the prequel that came afterwards. And Martin Scorsese, who is cinema man himself, watched this and sent A24 a letter saying that he couldn't sleep, which is a strong endorsement for a guy who is the cinema meme. That is the only thing I care about Martin Scorsese doing, is this. I don't give a shit about the Social Network. Cinema. Anyways, he is right, because Pearl is somehow more unsettling than X, despite being a prequel that explains how the killer became a killer, which usually makes the monsters less scary, but West and Mia Goth found a way to make understanding her worse. It is 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, and Pearl lives on an isolated Texas farm with her paralyzed father who can't speak or move, and her bitter German mother, Ruth, who controls every aspect of Pearl's life with the kind of strictness that guarantees your kid will eventually murder you. Or really like corn and get into the corn making. Yeah. Anyways, Pearl's husband, Howard, is overseas fighting in World War I, and she's stuck doing chores and caring for a man who's essentially a living corpse, while her mother tells her that she's worthless and will never be special. Wow, just girly pop things, I guess. Pearl's only escape is sneaking into town to watch movies at the local cinema, where she dreams about becoming a dancer and getting off this farm and being seen by people who matter. The film is shot in bright Technicolor to look exactly like a 1950s MGM musical. All golden sunlight and saturated colors and sweeping orchestral music that tells you this is a fairy tale about a girl chasing her dreams. And life advice from Chupacabra, don't chase those dreams, because you might end up as a wrinkly old psychopath. Except Pearl is already deeply disturbed before this movie even starts, because she feeds the family's goose to an alligator in the lake and watches it get torn apart with this blank expression that says she's not getting joy from this exactly. It's more just confirming that violence is possible and she has the ability to utilize it. She takes the scarecrow from the cornfield back to the barn and lovingly does corn with it, while imagining that the scarecrow is the projectionist from the cinema that she's been flirting with. Can you imagine you're like off at war and you come home and find out your wife is banging the scarecrow? Like, I don't know, as a guy who's been cheated on before, I think that's worse than it gets. Like, that's worse. That's the worst thing it can be. It's not even a real person. It's a fucking scarecrow. Can you imagine that shit? Like, anyways, she is now auditioning to be a dancer, and she fails it for a traveling dance troupe because she's not blonde enough, not all American enough, and this rejection is the final crack in her psyche that was already fractured beyond repair. What follows is a killing spree that feels inevitable. She murders the projectionist when he doesn't fulfill her fantasies. Valid crash out, obviously kidding. She smothers her paralyzed father with a pillow after he witnesses her dancing in a way that makes her feel ashamed. This man is paralyzed. Valid crash out. She chases her mother around the kitchen and kills her with a thrown pot of scalding stew. Valid crash out. And she hunts down her sister-in-law Mitzi with an axe through her cornfield. I actually mean cornfield when I say that. And feeds the remains to her alligator. Valid crash out. The violence is brutal, but the film treats it with this strange matter-of-fact quality, like we're watching someone complete a to-do list rather than commit serial murder. The scariest scene in this movie is 9 minutes long and contains no violence at all. Pearl sits Mitzi down and confesses everything in an unbroken close-up monologue where Goth's face is the entire frame, and West refused to call cut for 6 minutes straight while she cried and explained her hatred and loneliness, and the feeling that something essential is missing inside her that everyone else seems to have. Critics compared it to the opening of Inglourious Bastards. Why are we listening to movie critics these days? That is a very weird comparison. Anyways, I think it's a pretty good movie. It's a trilogy. There's another movie at the end, but there's a reason I didn't include it because I don't think the last one's as good as the first two, but it's worth watching if you want to go see see it. Now let's talk about Splinter. Toby Wilkins made a creature feature about a parasitic fungus that takes over dead bodies but doesn't understand how human skeletons work, so it just snaps bones and bends limbs backwards until the corpse moves in whatever direction it wants. The result is a zombie that moves wrong in a way that your brain immediately rejects is deeply unnatural. Young couple Seth and Polly are heading out camping when they get carjacked by escaped convict Dennis and his drug addict girlfriend Lacey, and this setup should lead to a tense hostage thriller. Instead, they run over something covered in black spines, pull into a gas station to fix the tire, discover that the attendant has been killed by an organism that is still inside his reanimated corpse. Lacey finds the body in the bathroom and it attacks her. She dies, and then her corpse stands back up with all of its joints bending the wrong way because the parasite is piloting a meat puppet and it doesn't know how to use it. The creature design is really where Splinter earns its reputation as being terrifying. The infected bodies move in this jerky insect-like motion with the limbs snapping and reversing direction mid-movement. The effects were actually achieved by using a gymnast, a mime, and multiple stunt performers to create this physical vocabulary that no CGI is coming close to. Severed body parts continue functioning independently as well, so at one point a detached hand is crawling across the floor towards them while the rest of the body is doing something else entirely. And the film treats this with the same casual horror as everything else that's happening. The organism hunts by body heat, which means that the only way to hide from it is lowering your core temperature with bags of ice until you're cold enough to be invisible. And this creates this film's central survival mechanic. You are not fighting the monster, you're just trying to make it think you're already dead. The worst scene involves Dennis's arms getting infected after a splinter prick, and then they watch in real time as his arm starts twisting violently and breaking itself trying to reach Seth and Polly, while Dennis screams and begs them to cut it off. They amputate using a box cutter to slice through flesh and a cinder block to snap through bone because they don't have better tools, which is just a terrifying concept. I don't even like thinking about that. That's just, you need a saw, but they didn't have a saw. They just like, terrifying. The visual effects really sell this movie. If you're gonna watch a horror movie, watch this one. Let's move on from spikes to blobs now. Chuck Russell and Frank Darabont remade the 1958 Blob and decided the best way to improve it was making the monster faster, meaner, and explicitly a government bioweapon that accidentally came back to Earth after they launched it into space because it was too dangerous to keep on the ground. Very reassuring stuff from the Cold War era. Really inspires confidence in federal decision making. Film opens in small town Arborville, California, where a meteorite crashes and an old homeless guy finds this gelatinous pink goopy stuff inside that immediately latches onto his body and starts dissolving him. High schoolers Paul, Meg, and motorcycle rebel Brian bring him to the hospital, but it's already too late. The Blob consumes Paul in front of everyone, which is a bold move because Paul is clearly set up as the hero in this film. He's the handsome football star with a bright future, and the film kills him 20 minutes in just to establish that nobody's safe and your expectations mean nothing here, which is a really smart move for a horror movie this early on. The Blob itself was created by a 23-year-old effects supervisor named Tony Gardner, who lied about being 25 to get the job and then directed a 33-person crew building 41 effects sequences over 7 months. And the result is some of the most visually disturbing practical effects work of the entire decade, which, by the way, if you want to get into the industry, that's one of the smartest things you can do. It's exactly what I did. I wasn't fucking leading teams or anything. I used to work in the film industry. I just lied about how old I was. I was 18 working on sets with people thought I was 25. I'm tall. I'm 6'2". I know you can't tell because I'm sitting in my movies and I look older, so people just never clock me on my age, and it worked. But anyways, that's just like an off tangent. The kills are creative and brutal in ways that push boundaries most horror movies won't touch. A waitress literally barricades herself in a phone booth and the Blob seeps through the gaps, builds pressure, and engulfs her from feet to head in this overhead shot that's tense, grotesque, and weirdly funny all at once because there's something absurd about being murdered by angry Jello. A handyman gets grabbed and pulled headfirst down a kitchen sink drain, which shouldn't be possible, but the Blob doesn't give a shit about physics or plumbing. It wants to eat, and more controversially, a young kid gets consumed on screen in the sewers. And killing children in horror movies, especially in like the 1980s, was a big no-no. But this movie just said, fuck the rules, the Blob's gonna eat them. Let's now move on to another horror movie I loved that came out in the last couple of years, The Cursed. Sean Ellis wrote, directed, and shot this period werewolf film and decided the best way to make lycanthropy scary again was connecting it directly to colonial genocide. So this beast isn't just a random curse. It is cosmic justice for a massacre that the perpetrators absolutely deserve to suffer for. In late 19th century rural France, a wealthy land baron, Seamus Laurent, hires mercenaries to wipe out a Romani clan who have legitimate claims to the land he he wants for himself. But when has that ever mattered in history? And Ellis films this genocide in this extraordinary wide shot from a distance where you watch covered wagons burning and families getting shot in the back without cutting away or zooming in. The long take and the sort of like brutal coldness it has makes us feel less like a movie and more like watching actually brutal history unfold. Before dying, a Romani elder fashions silver dentures shaped like wolf fangs from melted down coins, implied to be 30 pieces of silver from Judas betraying Jesus, which is a nice touch of biblical horror layered on top, but honestly, I missed that. I don't know anything about that stuff. Anyway, she's buried alive while reciting an invocation, and a male Romani is dismembered and erected as a scarecrow over the mass grave. And then everyone involved in the massacre goes home thinking they got away with it. The curse begins through the children because generational trauma works that way. The town's kids start sharing identical nightmares about the scarecrow and silver teeth. A farm boy named Timmy leads them to dig up the buried dentures, and when he puts them in his mouth, he becomes possessed and bites young Edward Lawrence's throat. The creature that emerges is deliberately not a traditional full moon werewolf transformation. It is described as a xenomorphic, larva-like resembling hairless hyenas or a fleshy golem creature that looks deeply wrong. One of the coolest werewolf designs ever. And Ellis keeps this beast mostly hidden for the first half using an alien level restraint where you only get glimpses and like mutilated corpses. The really scary part of this movie is the autopsy, because John McBride in the movie traps and kills one of the creatures, cuts it open, and discovers that the original human victim is still alive and screaming inside, trapped within the beast's body. It is a direct callback to the alien in the chestburster scene. It's very much inspired by that. It's body horror at its most disturbing. You were not replaced by the monster, but you are inside it, conscious and aware while it uses you as a vehicle. Honestly, I don't love werewolf movies that much. I think it's a kind of a boring concept a lot of times, but this is a really good example of it done well. Very scary horror movie. But those are just some of the most scariest horror movies that you probably haven't heard of before. Go give some of these a watch if you're tired of like modern horror movies that are often like not scary at all. Let me know if you've seen any of these below down in the comment section below. And to the one guy that has commented 500 times for me to cover the coffee table, you're welcome. I had seen it like 2 years ago. I didn't know if anyone was interested in it. Anyways, if you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give a like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on any future uploads. And if you want to watch another one of my videos, hype the video and click the one that's on the screen right now.